Snow fell slowly from the gray sky, covering the streets of Krail City with a thin white blanket. The cold wind moved between the buildings like sharp knives. Cutting into skin, shadows from the tall, crooked towers stretched over the crowded market. People moved between stalls, shouting prices, trading goods, and arguing over small coins. Some laughed, some cursed, but most ignored the thin figure standing at the corner of the street. She was small, maybe 17 years old, but her body looked weaker. Her skin was pale and marked with dirt, her hair tangled and falling in her face. She wore only a torn cloth around her body, barely enough to cover her. Her bare feet were red from the cold, toes turning a sick blue every time the wind came. She shook like a leaf, but she did not move. She just stood there, head down, eyes half closed, like she had no strength left. Around her, voices whispered, "That's the runaway," one merchant said, spitting on the ground. "She's worth nothing," another answered. Her own people threw her away. A group of children passed, pointing and laughing. One threw a piece of spoiled bread at her feet. She did not even look at it. Daniel, a human trader, was walking through the market looking for engine parts. He had been on Krail for 3 days, and he already hated it. The city was full of greed and cruelty, and the air always smelled of smoke and cheap oil. But what he saw now made him stop in his tracks. The girl raised her head for a moment. Her eyes met his large, bright, and filled with something he could not name. It was not only sadness, it was something deeper, a hollow emptiness that came when a person had lost everything. In that single second, Daniel knew she was not just another beggar. He stepped closer. "Who is she?" he asked the nearest stall owner. The alien vendor snorted. "Property," he said, pointing at the girl. "Belonged to a mining crew, ran away, got caught. No one wants her, no one will pay for her. So she stands there until she freezes." Daniel's stomach turned. "She's not a thing," he said quietly. The vendor laughed. "Everything is a thing if it can be sold. Human." Daniel walked toward her. Up close, she looked even smaller. Her lips were dry and cracked, her hands shaking as she tried to pull the cloth tighter around her thin frame. The snow on her shoulders was melting into her skin, but she didn't brush it away. He took off his coat, a thick brown one made for cold worlds. "Here," he said, holding it out. Her eyes widened as if she didn't understand. Slowly, she reached out, touching the fabric with the tips of her fingers. It was warm. She pulled it around herself, and for the first time in hours, her shaking slowed. Behind them, the vendor shouted, "Hey, if you want her, you pay." Daniel turned. "I'm not buying her," he said. The vendor grinned with yellow teeth. "Then you leave her, or she dies. Human? Those are the rules here." The market seemed to grow quieter. People were watching now, eyes curious, waiting to see what the human would do. Daniel looked back at the girl. She was holding his coat tightly, like it was the only thing keeping her alive. Her lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. He leaned down. "What is your name?" he asked. Her voice was weak, almost a whisper. "Lyra." Daniel straightened. The vendor crossed his arms. "So human. You keep her, or you walk away." Daniel's mind raced. He had not come here to save anyone, but he could not walk away. If he did, she would not live to see tomorrow. And something inside him refused to let that happen. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small pouch of credits. "This is all I have," he said. The vendor looked inside, then spat. "Not enough." Daniel stepped closer, his voice low. "It's enough for a life." The vendor stared at him for a long moment, then finally took the pouch. "Fine, human, she's yours. But don't bring her back when she starts to die." Daniel put an arm around Lyra's shoulders, guiding her away from the crowd. She walked slowly, each step careful, as if she feared she might fall. The snow kept falling, covering their path. Behind them, the voices of the market faded. Ahead, Daniel's small ship waited, its lights shining like a promise. For the first time in years, Lyra was walking toward warmth, and for the first time since he had arrived on Krail, Daniel felt like he was doing something that mattered. The streets outside the market were quieter. But the cold was even sharper here. Lyra walked beside Daniel, still wrapped in his coat. Her head lowered, her small hands gripped the fabric like she was afraid someone would take it from her. Daniel could feel the slight tremble in her body. Through the coat, he knew she was weak, not just from the cold, but from hunger and years of mistreatment. They passed a row of dark buildings, most of them made from rusted metal and stone. The walls were covered in old posters, some ripped, some fading into nothing. A group of rough-looking aliens sat by a fire barrel, watching them with cold eyes. Daniel kept moving. Keeping his body between them and Lyra, he could feel their stares following until they turned the corner. Ahead, the spaceport lights came into view. Ships of every shape and size were docked, their hulls covered in frost. Daniel's small cargo ship, the Wayfarer, was waiting at the far end. He guided Lyra toward it, but she stopped suddenly. Her eyes darted to the shadows between the docking bays. Daniel followed her gaze and saw 3 figures stepping out: the vendor from the market and 2 others. "You didn't pay enough," the vendor called, his voice thick with greed. Daniel's jaw tightened. "We agreed on the price," he said. The vendor grinned. "I changed my mind. She's worth more now that someone actually wants her." Lyra's grip on the coat tightened. Her breathing quickened. Daniel took a step forward, his hand near the blaster on his belt. "You got your credits, now leave," he said. His voice calm but cold. One of the vendor's men stepped closer. "Maybe we take the girl and your ship," he said. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "You try, and you won't live to regret it." The air between them grew tense, the cold wind carrying only the sound of their breaths. Finally, the vendor raised his hands. "Fine, human, but don't expect the law to protect you here." They turned and walked away. Disappearing back into the shadows, Daniel exhaled slowly, then looked at Lyra. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tight. "They won't touch you again," he said. She nodded slightly, though her eyes still carried fear. Inside the Wayfarer, the warmth hit her like a wave. She hesitated in the doorway, looking around as if unsure she was allowed inside. Daniel motioned to a small bench near the heater. "Sit," he said gently. "You're safe here." She moved slowly, lowering herself onto the bench, her eyes fixed on the floor. Daniel went to the storage compartment and pulled out a thermal blanket. He draped it over her shoulders, adding another layer of warmth. Then he placed a steaming cup of broth in her hands. She stared at it for a moment before taking a small sip. Her eyes closed as the warmth spread through her. After a few minutes, she spoke, her voice quiet. "You paid for me?" Daniel sat across from her. "I didn't buy you," he said. "I made sure you could leave with me." She looked confused. "Why?" Daniel shrugged. "Because no one else would." Her hands tightened around the cup. "They said I wasn't worth anything," she whispered. Daniel leaned forward, his voice firm. "They were wrong." She glanced at him, her eyes uncertain. But searching, he could tell she was not used to kindness. The heater hummed softly. The only sound in the small cabin. Daniel stood and went to prepare food, opening a pack of bread and heating a bowl of stew when he placed it in front of her. She hesitated again. "You can eat," he said with a faint smile. "It's yours." This time, she didn't hold back. She ate slowly at first, then faster, as if afraid it might disappear. Daniel let her finish in silence, knowing she needed it more than words. When she was done, she leaned back, eyes half closed. "Where will you take me?" she asked. Daniel thought for a moment. "Somewhere safe, far from here." Her lips moved into the smallest smile, but it vanished quickly. "They'll come after me," she said, her voice trembling. "Then they'll have to go through me." "First," Daniel replied. For a long moment, they sat in the quiet warmth of the ship. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the city in white. Inside, for the first time in years, Lyra felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. It was fragile, like a candle in the wind, but it was there, and Daniel, though he didn't know why, was determined to protect it. The hum of the Wayfarer's engines was soft, almost like a low heartbeat. Lyra sat on the bench near the heater, the thermal blanket still wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The warmth of the small ship felt strange to her, almost unreal. For so long, her life had been cold stone floors, sharp winds, and empty nights. Now, she was surrounded by soft light and air that did not sting her lungs. Daniel moved quietly in the small kitchen space. He opened another pack of supplies and set a pot on the stove. The smell of heating stew began to fill the cabin, rich, warm, and comforting. Lyra's stomach gave a small, painful twist, but she kept her eyes down. She had learned long ago never to ask for food on the streets. Asking meant someone would take it from you before you could eat. Daniel glanced over his shoulder. "You like stew?" he asked. Lyra hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. He smiled faintly. "Good. This one's got real vegetables, not the dried stuff." He stirred the pot slowly, letting the scent grow stronger. A memory flickered in Lyra's mind, a bowl of hot soup her mother once gave her when she was a child. It had been the last warm meal she could remember before everything was taken. Her hands tightened on the blanket as she tried to push the thought away. Daniel set a metal bowl in front of her, steam rising in small clouds. "Eat," he said gently. "It's yours." Lyra stared at the bowl. The stew was thick, full of chunks of root vegetables and strips of meat. She reached out slowly, as if the food might vanish if she moved too quickly. Her first spoonful was small, careful, the moment it touched her tongue. The warmth spread through her whole body. She swallowed, then took another, this one larger. Soon she was eating faster, spoon scraping the bottom of the bowl. Daniel watched quietly, leaning back in his chair. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions. He knew that right now, this was more than just food. It was trust. When the bowl was empty, Lyra set the spoon down. Her eyes were half closed, a faint blush of warmth on her cheeks. For the first time since he had seen her, she looked alive. "Do you want more?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "No. I'm full." Her voice was still soft, but there was a little more strength in it now. Daniel nodded, taking the bowl away. Lyra's eyes followed him, as if still unsure he wouldn't suddenly demand something in return. He sat back down, resting, his arms on the table. "So," he said, after a moment, "Lyra, where were you before the market?" Her body stiffened, her gaze dropping to the blanket. "I don't," she began, but her voice trailed off. Daniel didn't push. "You don't have to tell me now," he said, "only if you want to." For a long time, she was silent. The sound of the heater filled the space between them. Finally, she spoke, her words slow and uneven. "I worked in a mine," she said, "cleaning tools, carrying things. No clothes, no food, unless we stole it." Her eyes stayed on the floor. "If you fell or got sick, they left you." Daniel's hands tightened into fists under the table. He had heard of such places, but seeing the result in front of him made his stomach turn. He forced his voice to stay calm. "You're not there anymore." She looked up at him, and for the briefest second, he saw something fragile in her expression, hope mixed with fear. As if she wanted to believe him, but didn't dare. The ship swayed slightly as a cold wind swept across the port. Daniel glanced toward the door. "They'll come looking for you," he said quietly. "We'll have to leave soon." Lyra's fingers tightened around the blanket. "If they find me." "They won't." Daniel interrupted firmly. "I'll make sure of it." Her lips parted slightly. But no words came out. Instead, she pulled the blanket tighter around herself. For the rest of the evening, she stayed near the heater, watching Daniel as he worked on small ship repairs. Every time he looked at her, she quickly looked away. But there was a small, almost invisible change in her posture. She no longer sat like someone waiting for a blow. Later, Daniel dimmed the lights and locked the door to the cabin. "You can sleep here tonight," he said, pointing to the bench. "It's warm, and you'll be safe." Lyra hesitated, then slowly lay down, still wrapped in the blanket. Daniel turned away to give her privacy. Within minutes, her breathing slowed. The steady rhythm of someone who had not slept this peacefully in years. Daniel sat at the controls, staring out at the snow-covered port. He knew this was only the beginning if the slavers wanted her back. They wouldn't stop, but he also knew something else. No matter what came, he wasn't letting her go. The next morning, pale light from Crail's sun filtered through the small window of the Wayfarer. Lyra was still wrapped in the thermal blanket, sitting quietly on the bench. Her hair was messy, her face pale. But there was a little more color in her cheeks than yesterday. Daniel handed her a warm mug of tea. She took it with both hands, breathing in the steam before taking a slow sip. For a few minutes, neither spoke. Outside, the muffled noise of the spaceport echoed, the thud of cargo crates, the hum of engines warming up, the distant shout of workers inside. The heater gave off a steady hum, filling the silence with comfort. Daniel finally sat down across from her, his expression calm but serious. "Lyra," he began, "I know you've been through a lot, but if I'm going to keep you safe, I need to know the truth." Her hands tightened around the mug. Her eyes flickered toward the floor, as if the words he asked for were locked somewhere deep inside her. For a long time, she said nothing. Daniel waited, giving her space, not pressing. At last, she spoke, her voice low and unsteady. "I was born in the lower mines," she said. Her words came slowly, almost as if each one hurt to say, "My people. We were taken there when I was a baby. We were supposed to work until we paid a debt, but no one ever left. No one ever got free." Her fingers trembled around the cup. "My parents. They died when I was small. I don't even remember their faces clearly, just their voices." Daniel leaned forward slightly, listening without interrupting. "I grew up carrying tools for the miners," she continued. "Sometimes I cleaned the tunnels. Sometimes I carried food. But we never had enough. We were always hungry." She swallowed hard. "If anyone slowed down, the guards hit them. If you got sick, they threw you out into the snow." Daniel's jaw tightened. He had seen cruelty before. But something about her voice, the way she spoke without tears, like the pain had been burned into her too deeply to cry over, made his chest ache. "How did you get out?" he asked gently. She hesitated, her lips pressing together. "One night. The guard who watched. My section was drunk. I took a chance and ran," she said. Her eyes moved to the side, unfocused. "I thought I could find work in the city. But I had nothing, not even clothes. So they caught me, said I was a thief, and sold me to a trader." Daniel's hands curled into fists on the table. "And that's how you ended up in the market," he said quietly. She nodded, not looking at him. "I didn't think anyone would help me." "No one ever does," she whispered. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she quickly sipped her tea to hide it. Daniel reached over, resting a hand lightly on the table near hers. "You were wrong about that," he said. "Someone did help you, and I'm not going to stop now." For a moment, she just stared at him, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. Then she nodded once, a small, almost invisible movement. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Daniel checked the ship's systems, making sure the engines were ready. He had a feeling they would need to leave Crail sooner rather than later. Lyra sat by the window, watching the snow fall outside. Her shoulders were less tense than before, though she still glanced toward the door whenever a noise echoed from outside. By midday, Daniel had finished his preparations. He turned to her. "We'll leave tonight. Once the port is quieter," he said. She tilted her head. "Why not now?" "Because the people looking for you will expect us to run," he replied. "Better to move when they've stopped watching." Lyra nodded slowly. The idea of leaving made her nervous, but also gave her a strange feeling she hadn't felt in years: anticipation. For the first time, there was a chance that her life could be different. It's not better in a small way, but completely. That evening, Daniel prepared another warm meal. They ate in silence. But it was not the same silence as before. It was softer, calmer, as if the space between them no longer felt so wide. After they finished, Daniel leaned back. "You should get some rest before we go," he said. Lyra hesitated, then nodded, curling up on the bench under the blanket as Daniel dimmed the lights. He looked at her one last time before turning to the controls. She was already drifting toward sleep, her breathing slow, her face peaceful. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. The slavers would not give up, and the galaxy had no shortage of danger, but he also knew that now, protecting her was not just a choice. The Wayfarer sat quietly in the docking bay, its engines cold, its lights dim. Outside, the city of Crail was wrapped in night, the snow falling heavier now. Daniel kept the interior lights low. Not wanting to draw attention, Lyra sat near the heater, the blanket still around her shoulders, her eyes on the small window. She watched the falling snow, but her mind was far away, remembering other nights, colder nights, when she had nothing to protect her. Daniel was checking the navigation system when the sound came. Footsteps on the metal platform outside. He froze, listening. The steps were slow but heavy, and they didn't pass by. They stopped right outside the Wayfarer's main door. Daniel's hand moved to the blaster on his hip. A voice called out, muffled through the metal. "Human, open the door. We just want to talk." Daniel's eyes narrowed. He didn't need to see their faces to know it was trouble. Beside him, Lyra's body stiffened. Her hands gripping the blanket tightly, she recognized the voice. One of the vendor's men from the market. Daniel moved to the control panel and pressed the intercom button. "You've got nothing to say that I want to hear," he said, his voice low and steady. There was a short silence. Then the voice came. Again, sharper this time. "Hand over the girl, and we'll forget you were ever here." Lyra shook her head quickly, her eyes wide with fear. Daniel glanced at her and gave a small shake of his head, a silent promise. He pressed the button again. "She's not yours to take," he said. "Now get off my dock." The footsteps outside shifted. The sound of more people moving closer. Daniel could hear the faint click of weapons being readied. He turned to Lyra. "Stay low, stay quiet." She slid off the bench and crouched behind the table, her eyes never leaving him. Daniel took position near the door, his blaster ready. Outside, the men spoke in low voices, their words carried away by the wind. Then, the pounding began, hard fists slamming against the metal door. "You can't keep her, human." The voice shouted, "She belongs to us." Daniel's reply was calm, almost cold. "She belongs to no one." The pounding grew louder, more aggressive. Then, it stopped suddenly, replaced by footsteps moving away. Daniel waited, listening. But the night outside grew silent again, after a long moment. He lowered his weapon and went to check the security feed. The small screen flickered, showing the dock outside. It was empty. Only the falling snow visible under the dim lights. But he knew they hadn't given up. They would be back, and next time. They might not knock. He turned to Lyra, who was still crouched behind the table. "They're gone for now," he said. She slowly stood, her hands still shaking. "They won't stop," she whispered. "I know," Daniel replied. "That's why we're leaving. Now, in minutes." Daniel had the ship powered up. The Wayfarer's engines rumbled to life, the soft vibration filling the cabin. Lyra sat in the co-pilot's seat, still wrapped in the blanket. She glanced at him nervously. "Will they follow us?" "They can try," Daniel said, his hands moving over the controls, "but they won't catch us." The docking clamps released with a heavy clang. The Wayfarer rose slowly from the platform. Snow swirling in its wake, the city's lights faded beneath them as they climbed higher into the dark sky, but Daniel's eyes kept scanning the radar. He knew predators always followed when you took their prize. Sure enough, a red dot appeared on the screen. Moving fast, Daniel cursed under his breath, pushing the throttle forward. The Wayfarer shot ahead, engines straining. Lyra gripped the edge of her seat, her eyes wide as the stars began to blur. The pursuing ship closed the distance quickly, its larger frame casting a faint shadow against the stars. "Hold on, Daniel," said, flipping a switch to divert more power to the engines. The Wayfarer surged forward, but the other ship matched their speed. A warning light flashed in coming target lock. Daniel banked sharply to the left, the stars spinning outside the window. Lyra let out a small gasp, clutching the blanket tighter. Daniel kept his focus. Weaving through the debris field ahead, chunks of old satellites and broken ships drifted silently in the void. The larger ship followed, but its bulk made it slower to turn. Daniel used the gap, cutting between two massive pieces of wreckage. The radar beeped. The pursuer had lost their lock. Within seconds, the red dot began to fade from the screen. Daniel eased the throttle, the hum of the engines softening. Lyra's breathing was still fast, but her eyes carried something new, a spark of relief. "They're gone," Daniel said. She looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, "You really won't let them take me? Not now, not ever." Daniel replied, his voice firm. For the first time, she believed him. The Wayfarer drifted in the darkness of space, far beyond the glow of Krail's cold sun. Stars spread out in every direction, sharp and bright against the endless black. Daniel sat at the controls, the hum of the engine steady beneath his hands. Beside him, Lyra sat wrapped in the thermal blanket, her eyes watching the stars pass by. She had never been this far from the planet's surface, never seen the galaxy spread out like an ocean of light for the first time in years. The air around her did not taste of smoke or metal dust. She could breathe without coughing, and each breath felt like it reached deeper into her chest. Daniel glanced at her from time to time, noting the way she leaned forward as if afraid to blink in case the view disappeared. "Not bad, right?" he asked. She turned her head slightly, her voice soft. "It's beautiful." Daniel smiled faintly, but his eyes returned to the controls. The radar was clear for now, but he knew the slavers' ships had faster engines than most cargo haulers. If they were determined, they could find them again. He had to make sure they vanished completely from any traceable route. He tapped a series of keys, bringing up the star map. "We'll cut through the Astera belt," he said. "It's dangerous, but it'll hide us." Lyra tilted her head. "Dangerous? How?" "Rogue asteroids, unstable magnetic fields, sometimes pirates." Daniel replied casually. "But the slavers won't risk following there." Her fingers tightened on the edge of her blanket. She didn't know much about space travel, but she understood enough to know that where pirates were, danger followed. Still, she nodded slowly, trusting him in a way she didn't think she could trust anyone again. Hours passed in the quiet hum of travel. Daniel kept one hand on the controls, guiding the Wayfarer toward the faint glimmer of the belt ahead. Lyra sat quietly, occasionally sipping water from the cup he had given her. Every now and then, her eyes would flicker with unease, as if expecting a shadow to appear on the radar. When they reached the outer edge of the Austera belt, the stars ahead seemed to twist and shimmer. Massive chunks of rock floated in slow, silent rotation, some small as a crate, others larger than a city. The wayfarer slipped between them. Engines lowered to a careful hum. The rocks were old, pitted by thousands of years of collisions every so often. A faint blue glow shimmered between them, the sign of magnetic storms brewing. Daniel's voice was calm but focused. "Stay close to your seat. No sudden movements," he said. Lyra nodded, gripping the armrests as the ship weaved through the maze of drifting stone. The sound of small impacts rang through the hull, bits of dust and ice striking the metal. Each sound made her tense, but Daniel's steady hands never wavered on. The controls, halfway through the belt, a warning light flickered on the console. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "What is it?" Lyra asked quickly. "Not slavers," he said. "Something worse, pirates." A blip appeared on the radar, closing fast. Daniel adjusted the throttle, steering the wayfarer deeper into the dense part of the field. The pirate ship's engines flared behind them, its sleek black frame cutting through the rocks with sharp precision. "They're going to try to board us," Daniel said, "but they'll have to catch us first." The wayfarer dipped sharply. Weaving between two spinning asteroids, the pirate ship followed, firing a burst of energy that scorched the edge of one rock. Lyra gasped, gripping the seat tighter. Daniel's jaw clenched, his focus absolute. He guided the ship through a narrow gap between two massive stones, the space barely wider than the wayfarer's wings. The pirate ship hesitated, then tried to follow. One of the asteroids shifted suddenly, scraping against its hull with a screech of metal. It slowed, smoke spilling from one of its engines. Daniel didn't wait to see if they recovered. He pushed the wayfarer forward deeper into the twisting labyrinth. Minutes later, the radar showed no pursuit. Daniel eased the engines and let the ship drift in the shadow of a massive asteroid. Lyra's breathing was fast, her eyes wide. You got us away," she whispered. Daniel gave a small nod. "Told you I'd keep you safe." They stayed hidden for another hour, letting the belt's magnetic interference scatter any tracking signals. When they finally emerged into open space, on the other side, the stars felt brighter, cleaner. Lyra leaned back in her seat, her shoulders slowly relaxing. Daniel set a new course toward a human colony several systems away. There, he hoped, the slaver's reach would not be so strong. As the wayfarer settled into its route, Daniel glanced at her. "You're free now." "Lyra," he said quietly. She didn't answer at first, her gaze lost in the endless night beyond the window. Then she turned to him, her voice almost a whisper. "I don't even know what that feels like, but maybe I will." The wayfarer approached the human colony world of Haven Reach, its blue and green surface shining softly in the light of its twin suns. Lyra sat by the window, her face pressed close to the glass, her eyes wide with wonder she had never seen. A planet so alive, oceans that sparkled like silver, forests stretching farther than she could imagine, and cities that glowed warmly instead of burning with smoke. To her, it looked like something from a dream. Daniel guided the ship through the landing approach, the steady beeps of the navigation system mixing with the low hum of the engines. "This place is different," he said, glancing at her. "People here take care of each other." Lyra didn't answer right away. Still staring at the world below, after a long moment, she whispered, "It doesn't look like it wants to hurt me." Daniel's lips curved in a faint smile. "That's because it doesn't." They landed in a quiet docking port on the colony's edge. When the ramp lowered, a wave of warm, fresh air washed over them. Lyra hesitated at the top of the ramp, her fingers gripping the railing. The ground was soft beneath her bare feet. Real soil, not metal or ice. She took a slow step, then another, as if afraid the planet might vanish if she moved too quickly. Daniel led her through the port toward the small market square. The air was filled with the scent of fresh bread, roasted meat, and flowers. Voices called out in friendly tones, not shouting orders or insults. Children ran past them, laughing, their boots kicking up dust. Lyra turned her head in every direction, trying to take in everything at once. They stopped at a clothing stall. The vendor, a smiling woman with warm eyes, looked Lyra up and down without a word. She began pulling soft shirts, sturdy pants, and a pair of worn but clean boots from her shelves. Lyra froze, unsure if she should touch them. Daniel nodded toward the clothes. "There for you," he said gently. Her hands moved slowly, brushing the fabric, feeling its warmth. It had been years since she had owned anything that truly belonged to her. After she dressed, Daniel could see how different she looked. The loose, ragged fear in her posture had begun to fade, replaced by something new. A quiet strength. They found an inn near the market where Daniel arranged for a small, clean room for her. When they stepped inside, Lyra stood still in the doorway, staring at the bed, the table, and the single window that looked out toward the hills. "This is mine," she asked softly. Daniel nodded. "All yours?" Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She walked slowly around the room, touching the wooden bed frame, running her fingers over the smooth table. Finally, she turned back to him. "I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to," Daniel said. "Just live." That night, they shared one last meal together at the inn's small dining hall. Lyra ate slowly, savoring every bite, no longer rushing like she might lose it. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a soft glow across the room for the first time. She didn't feel the cold in her bones, didn't feel the weight of eyes watching her. Instead, she felt safe when it was time for him to leave. Daniel stood at the doorway of her room. Lyra stood too, clutching the edge of her new shirt. "You're going?" she said, her voice not accusing, just stating a truth. "I have work to do," Daniel replied, "but I'll be back, and if you ever need me, you just send word." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. It was a light hug, hesitant at first, but it grew tighter. "You gave me more than clothes," she said quietly. "You gave me hope." Daniel rested a hand on her back. "And you gave me a reason to fight." When he finally stepped out into the night, the air was cool but gentle. He looked up at the twin moons of Haven Reach and let out a slow breath. He had not planned to change a life when he came to Crail, but now he couldn't imagine having done anything else. Back in her room, Lyra stood by the window, watching the stars. Somewhere out there, she knew danger still existed, but here, for the first time, she had a place that was hers. She had clothes, food, a bed, and most importantly, the feeling that her life was worth something, and that was more than she had dared to dream. The twin moons lit the hills in silver light, and as Lyra lay down on her bed, she whispered to herself, "This is the beginning."